อันนี้เช็คใหม่ครับไปไหมครับโอเคครับ
Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
everyone. We will start the session in a few minutes. So anyone who would like interpretation, we have headsets available at the registration desk. You can go and get the headset and get ready for today's session. เดี๋ยวเราจะเริ่มงานในอีกไม่กี่นาที
So we're going to begin in a few minutes. Any guests who wants the translations, please collect your translation headset at the registrations table. Thank you. So for today, our sessions will be conducted in English with some Thais. So for those who need translations, please collect the translation headset at the registration table.
Conducted in English and Thai. Anyone who would like interpretation, please go get the headset at the registration desk. We will start the session in a few minutes.
Thank you. Good morning to all speakers. My name is Sarani Ashwanasakun. I am from the Fair Finance Thailand. So today, on behalf of the organizing teams between Fair Finance Thailand and Fair Finance Asia, I would like to welcome everyone to the seminars today. Our whole day will talk about the financial responsibilities and just energy transitions, and it should be in just energy transition. So today we will focus, we'll start with the press conference and then we'll follow by a seminars up until the afternoons. So why do we have to talk about financial institutions' roles today? I'm sure everyone's in this room are well aware, and the world has progressed tremendously from 20 years ago when we hear about development programs that could have high impact on social and environmental aspect. That will always be like CSOs demanding directly from the companies or from relevant government agencies. However, it cannot be avoided to say that the financial institutions play a crucial role in providing funding or lending to the project development. So financial institutions are therefore being expected to show their responsibilities to social and environmental aspect as well. So for example, in Thailand, just about last year, we issue what we call responsible lending guidelines and this is an agreement between like all Thai banks. And this is a project initiated by the Bank Association of Thailand under the support of Bank of Thailand. And the documents and all the guidelines for these responsible lendings have clear contents that the banks has to listen from stakeholders that are beyond that just customers and the shareholders, so they can use the ESG risk materials, ESG risk to integrate into their operation, and especially in providing lending and providing financial support from banks. So this is a clear expectation for the business operations of banks to change, that they have to apply ESGs in their operations directly. So it cannot just be policy, but it has to be in the operation and implementations. So that's the start for our countries. So as Fair Finance Thailand, we have been assessing and evaluating ESG from Thai banks constantly. It's good news for like big commercial banks in Thailand to accept the UNGPs, United Nations Guiding Principles, and that is an international standard for banks to show responsibility on human rights. And according to this, we want the responsibility to be shown at the supply chain level. So all those banks that apply these UNGPs, they have to change their operations that consider the risks of customers and to be able to elevate their complaint mechanisms to be more open for stakeholders. So this is actually good news. But of course, anyways, there's still gaps. There's a lot of challenges in many aspects. And this is what we're going to talk about today. And we focus on the roles of the banks in debt or just energy transitions. So I hope everyone's here today will gain a lot of knowledge, and it could be some stage for you to exchange knowledge for challenge that you have towards financial institutions. Thank you so much.
คุณสารินีค่ะ for the opening remarks. Now may I please invite Bernadette Victorio, Program Lead of Fair Finance Asia, for another welcome remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very happy to have you join us again for another day of engagement alongside the Bangkok Climate Action Week. My name is Bernadette Victorio. I lead the Fair Finance Asia program. I'm seeing faces from yesterday, and if you're joining us also online, welcome, and we hope that you will find the sessions engaging today. Asia is at a crossroads. Financial institutions, regulators, policymakers, communities, civil society, media, and the general public are increasingly aware of the urgency of mitigating and adapting to climate change and accelerating energy transition. Yet, amidst recent geopolitical shifts, many Asian countries are at risk of backtracking on their commitments to the Paris Agreement, other climate science imperatives, and just energy transition principles. In particular,
fossil นะคะรวมถึงการ ละเมิดนะคะในตัวห่วงโซ่อุปทานนะคะของตัวแร่ธาตุที่สำคัญนะคะการไม่มีการปรึกษานะคะรวมถึงว่าไม่ได้การปรึกษากับชุมชนนะคะตัวสิทธิมนุษยชนนะคะที่ถดถอยลง
Theme, financing a just, inclusive, and equitable future, mobilizing community and civil society voices for Asia's just energy transition. Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand will engage here at Bangkok Climate Action Week throughout this week to explore regional and national multi-stakeholder collaborative strategies that can redirect finance towards momentum for Asia's climate justice and transition goals, while amplifying the voices of communities, civil societies, women, indigenous peoples, youth, and other marginalized groups. Our objective for the meetings and the engagement this whole week is really to facilitate multi-stakeholder discussions on collaborative strategies, including through taxonomies for sustainable finance that can support the acceleration and scale-up of financing for sustainability-aligned activities that are also supportive of rights-based approaches to Asia's just energy transition and to address transboundary impacts. To raise public awareness on the key principles of JET in Asia that is aligned with time-bound climate justice imperatives and international human and environmental rights standards, to strengthen regional momentum, capacity, and solidarity among CSOs, civil society organizations, to effectively urge Asia's financial sector towards greater transparency through disclosures and accountability in climate and just transition financing, to amplify the voices of local communities and indigenous peoples affected by the financing of large-scale hydropower, coal-fired power plants, projects, and mineral extraction, and finally, to facilitate meaningful participation of youth-led regional and international finance campaigning on climate action across just energy transition in Asia. With these, we have organized and designed our agenda for the week to address all these, and we hope that you will find them interesting and engaging. We hope also that the morning's discussion will highlight some of the national priorities that were also discussed by Sarine in her remarks. Finally, we are very grateful to be here with the support of our colleagues from Fair Finance Thailand in organizing these events. We hope that you will, make sure to also check out our marketplace later on to discuss more about the initiatives and the themes that we will raise during the morning session. And with that, welcome again, and thank you so much for your participation. We look forward to engaging discussions with you this whole day and this whole week. Thank you.
Thank you again, Bernadette Victorial, the program lead of Fair Finance Asia, and Kun Sarini Achawanantakun, the head of research at Fair Finance Thailand, for framing the challenges and opportunities of
หูฟังนะคะที่โต๊ะลงทะเบียนได้นะคะ
Set again and
แล้วก็
adjust the volume
ช่วยลองฟัง
accordingly.
ก่อนนะคะปรับเสียง
Channel
ตามที่
1
ต้อง
is
การ
for
นะคะ
English
ช่อง
and
ภาษา
Channel 2 is
ช่อง
for
ภาษาอังกฤษ
Thai.
คือช่องที่1นะคะ ช่อง
After
ภาษา
the
ไทยคือ
session,
ช่องภาษา
if
ที่
you
2
would
ค่ะ
like to leave
ถ้า
the
เกิดว่าหลัง
venue,
เซสชันนะคะ
please
ถ้าเกิด
remember
ว่า
to
อยาก
return
จะ
the
ออกจากห้องนี้
headset
ไปนะคะ
to
อย่า
the
ลืม
registration
คืนหู
table
ฟัง
and
นะคะตรง
collect
โต๊ะ
your
ลงทะเบียน
ID
ก่อน
card
นะคะ
back.
แล้วก็รับตัวบัตรประ
For
ชาชน
our
กลับไป
online
นะคะ
participant,
สำหรับผู้
translation
ที่เข้า
is
ร่วมทาง
also
ออนไลน์นะคะ
available.
สามารถ
Please
รับ
use
ฟัง
the
การแปลภาษา
interpretation
ได้นะคะ
function.
ก็คือเลือกฟังก์ชันการแปลภาษาได้นะคะ
เราได้จัดเตรียมล่ามพูดพร้อมนะคะสำห
So
รับ
we have
แปล
prepared
เป็นภาษาไทย
simultaneous
และภาษาอังกฤษ
interpretation for both Thai
โดยทุก
and
ท่าน
English.
สามารถรับ
So
หูฟังได้
everyone
ที่โต๊ะลง
can
ทะเบียน
take the
ก
headsets
รุณา
at the
ทด
registration
สอบหู
table.
ฟังของท่าน
So
ตอนนี้
please
และ
kindly
ปรับระดับ
test
เสียง
your
ได้เลยนะคะ
headset first.
โดยช่องที่ 1 จะเป็นภาษาอังกฤษ
Channel 1
และ
is
ช่องที่
English
2
and
จะเป็น
Channel
ภาษา
2 is
ไทย
Thai.
หลังจากจบเซส
And
ชั่น
then after
หาก
the
ท่านต้อง
sessions,
การ
if
อ
you
อกไป
would
นอก
like
ส
to
ถาน
leave the
ที่กรุ
venue,
ณานำหู
please
ฟังไปคืน
kindly
ที่โต๊ะลง
return
ทะเบียน
the
และ
headset
รับ
at
บัตร
the
ประชาชนคืน
registration tables
สำหรับ
and
ผู้เข้า
collect
ร่วมออน
your
ไลน์
ID cards. Those attending online, you can select interpretation functions to listen to the interpretation.
For in-person attendees, please silence your devices. For those who join us virtually, please mute yourself unless speaking. Drop your comments, questions in the chat box. The moderators can indicate when virtual participants can be participate in the discussion. And please note that today's session is being recorded and live streamed. If you would not like to be photographed or included in the pictures, please make sure you take the seat at the back of the session, of the room. And also for those who would not like to be included in the photograph, you have the red sticker, so please make sure that it's visible to the staff so we don't include you in the pictures. And outside of today's session, Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand have organized an outdoor session, Strides of Solidarity, Run for Climate Justice and Transition that leave no one behind. On October 3rd, Friday at Benjakiti Park, Museum entrance. We will meet up at 7 a.m. and the event will go through 9 a.m. So please use the QR code to register and join this event. And now we will move into our first interactive session, which will be conducted in Thai, the press conference. Now may I please invite Kun Ponpakit Prithivongwanit, the moderator, to the stage.
Greetings to the press media and honorable guests to our event, Fair Finance Asia. On behalf of Fair Finance Thailand, FFT, it is a privilege to welcome all of you to our press conference today. The topic of the press conference is about holding Asian financial institutions accountable for social and environmental impacts of cross-border energy transition financing. When we say about energy transition, when it comes to the regions around Mekong River, especially major projects as hydro energy plants and many of the other projects proceeded without any impact on environment and social impacts. This is the reason why. And of course, they also forgot about significant community inclusiveness. This is why we had 3 speakers today. The first speaker is Benedict Victoria, the head of Fair Finance Asia. Benedict, may you please come on stage. Our second speaker, Binan Jijang, representative of Rakshan Kong, the representative of Menangkong community, and our final speaker, Sarini Achanakun, head researcher of Fair Finance Thailand, FFT. Please, our 3 speakers, please come on stage. Today's session, we shall begin with Benedict Victorio, sharing about the situation of the Mekong River communities and from the financial institutions, followed by Biyanan Chitjang, will be presenting the voices of the Mekong River communities of how they were impacted of cost boundary investments, and lastly, head researcher of FFT that will be presenting on the impact assessment and the gaps identification and how and what are the things that financial institutions must be concerned on. And then followed, returning back to Benedict Vittorio to present about the calls to action and what the financial institutions should proceed moving forward. Benedict, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I forgot to remove my translation device. But thank you so much, everybody, for this opportunity. Thank you, Fair Finance Thailand, for having me. I feel that I am the least qualified in this panel to talk about hydropower because I'm sitting together with experts on the national perspectives on this issue. But I am here to provide a little bit of the regional context based on the research and the advocacy that we are also supporting with at the regional level from Fair Finance Asia on this topic of hydropower financing. As some of you are aware, Fair Finance Asia is a regional network of over 90 civil society organizations that are working to ensure that there is greater transparency and accountability in the regional financial sector. Having said that, we are working in several countries across the region, including Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and also Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, and many other countries. We are 10 at the moment. I specifically highlight our countries in the Mekong region because these are, of course, the ones that are highly relevant for the discussions of hydropower financing. Last year, we at Fair Finance Asia at the regional level launched the research together with our partner Profundo, and it was titled Enhancing Sustainable Finance in the Mekong Hydropower, highlighting the challenges, opportunities, and way forward. The report urged financial institutions that provide cross-border financing to Mekong River hydropower projects to actively ensure that these projects uphold community rights and protect the environment. The report highlighted the devastating social and environmental consequences linked to large hydropower projects, all of which I'm sure that many in the room are aware of, and these include economic and environmental loss of forest, wetlands, mangroves that potentially amount to over $145 billion by 2040. Social and gendered impacts are also there, of course, and this includes displacement and resettlement leading to increased poverty, mental health stress, and a heavier burden of unpaid care and domestic work by female members of the community affected by large hydropower project displacements. Our assessment concluded that the environmental and human rights due diligence policies of financial institutions investing in the regional hydropower projects in the area were insufficiently compliant to a set of criteria based on international sustainability standards against the Fair Finance Guide International methodology, which is the methodology that we are using as a network to benchmark the policies and practices of financial institutions. The overall finding is that public policies or policies that are made public by these financial institutions coming from Vietnam, as well as in Thailand, do not adequately address the actual and potential adverse environmental and social impacts of hydropower projects that they finance. So we assess them against specific criteria, against the themes of commitment and transparency, gender requirements, biodiversity and environment, human rights and labor rights, and also supply chains. And against all these criteria, we found that cross-border financing across these projects were insufficiently compliant. We have found out that biodiversity specifically is lacking as part of the assessment of the banks when they are investing in these projects. More notably, we found out that even though some of the banks were signatories to international standards such as the Equator Principles, which mandates the use of international finance corporations' performance standards for managing project-related and environment social risks, they were still not compliant with these policies. We also noted that a significant weakness for all the financial institutions was lacking in the robust policies to facilitate meaningful consultations and securing free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, of local and indigenous peoples who are adversely affected by resettlements. And this gap really poses a risk to achieving just energy transition in the region. And more importantly, we also noted that at the regional level, the ASEAN taxonomy, which has been launched just a few years ago, considers that hydropower is an eligible green category project if certain criteria are met. This means that this enables financial institutions to use these projects for sustainable finance tools like green bonds and loans, which is highly concerning. While this could increase project emergence and risk, the taxonomy's requirements of do no significant harm criteria and social safeguards offer an opportunity to improve the environmental and social outlook of the sector at the Mekong sub-region countries. But we still note that this, of course, requires a lot of nuance and refining. Having said that, we note that there are a lot of scope for bridging the gap between the regional coordination, particularly in the countries that are experiencing the impacts of hydropower financing, particularly human and environmental costs. I will stop here and look forward to hearing more on others' insights.
ก็ท่านต่อไปขอเชิญ
So next, I would like to invite Kun Biananjit Zhang from Rak Siang Khong community. Hello. So dear distinguished guests and press, so I represent Rak Siang Khong community and my name is Biananjit Zhang. So I'm going to reflect on facts that were in the area. So Rak Siang Khong, it's in Chiang Rai province, and it's a province up north that is connected to Mekong River, and there's 7 provinces from the northeastern part of Thailand that are connected to Mekong River as well. So the development of dam in Bangkok, we have been fighting about the dam development since there's like Chinese dams on the lower part of China, which is like the upper part of Mekong. So since there were Chinese dam, there was a lot of like there is a lot of abnormalities that from the river that flows. Like the water would be drought, and then there would like the level of water would rise like above the normal level. So that was the first changes that we noticed. And then after that, they have Sayaburi Dam, and Sayaburi Dam it's at the lower part of Mekong River, and that's at the Lao PDR, and that would impact between the border between Laos and Thailand. So we asked for the court to protect us, but because it was outside like Thai jurisdiction, so we weren't able to do anything for the past 8 years. So Rak Siang Khong and our partners and like international rivers, and we trying to monitor the construction of Pak Bang Dam. And Pak Bang Dam, it's about 97 kilometers from Chiang Rai into the cities of Pak Bang and Udom sides of the Lao PDR, and that's going to have like transnational impact. So these are the 3 main events that we have been fought for the 8 years, and so there's going to be like permanent flooding or like inundations, and the water is going to come back and flood the areas of both Thai and Laos, and the impacts on Thailand. We asked for like the project developer to open or to disclose their information, that is it going to be like how much of this area is going to be under like permanent floodings. So but no one can give us an answers. So even though that they're going to keep the water at the 345 meter level from the sea levels, but in the areas we cannot really like pinpoint or identify the number, because you cannot really say like how much like where the flood's gonna go. And the companies that constructing the dam, they would only look at the Mekong River, but actually the water from the Mekong rivers go to the agricultural areas of Chiang Rai province. So there is no clarity there. Second issue is the loss of biodiversity. When there's a construction of a dam, biodiversity will be lost. Definitely they're going to change, but the levels of the water that rise abnormally, that's like during daytime, sometimes like in the week, it's like rises 2 to 3 meters and then go down to like 2 to 3 meters. And sometimes like out of seasons, waters were being kept to produce electricities. The release of water and then the keeping of water would be for electricity's productions. So then the level of water would be really abnormal for the areas around, and then the fish cannot lay eggs in the in the water in the tributaries. So and then during like dry seasons there would be other abnormalities, so that causes way of livings for the locals to change. And then the third one, the water management. You'll see very clearly that during the Chinese dam up above and then the Pak Bang Dam, we used to file complaints for national water systems organizations in the ONWR. So to like whether to keep the water in the dam or not, to manage that well. Otherwise, if there's a mismanagement, it would cause us drought or it would cause us flood. So 8 years, no answers. But today, the Pak Bang Dam, now they started putting machine there, and the constructions companies already in the field and in the areas. I understand the construction will start this month. Issues have not been fixed, and Chiang Rai people are really scarce and stressful because with last year flood at 2024 there was severe flood and a lot of
แม่น้ำสายเกิดมาตั้งแต่ปี
landslides. And actually landslide has been like happening for like 4 to 5 years ago when there was a construction of the dam at Sai River. So we're trying to have like the agencies to monitors, but we weren't successful. And if you see, because the dam were in like both countries, both in Myanmar and both in Lao PDR, but there weren't like any evaluation of how it's going to impact the river. So these severe natural disasters, besides the physical impact that we can see, like having like the rise of like water level. So Mekong River does not just only like stop the water, it sometimes make the water flow back. And if you look at last year, if you look at the water level, you will see that the Chinese dam release water when there's a lot of water in our countries, when there's like water coming from forests and the water coming from both Thailand and from both Laos. So in like releasing water from like the upper dams and then the lower dams, that make the water flow slow, so there were the backwater effect that took place. So what about almost like 10,000 of rides were having backwater effect for a couple months. So because when the water flow in, it cannot flow out. So we experienced temporary loss there. So these impacts that we are scared about are the like contaminations of like cadmiums that come from the dam and is actually illegals. And Pak Bang Dam, what we really worry about is that at Chiang Rai, we could be like toxic basins between the Pak Bang and the another dam, so that like the toxins could concentrate in the area of Chiang Rai, and no one has evaluated or find the solutions. That's why we have to ask for stakeholders to listen to us and from like the field. Thank you so much.
ขอบคุณครับก็ขอเชิญท่านต่อไปเลยครับคุณสรินีอัชวานันทกุลครับผม
ค่ะสวัสดีทุกท่านนะคะก็อาจจะมามองในมุมงานที่ Fair Finance Thailand ทำนะคะเกี่ยวกับการเรียกร้องและติดตามความรับผิดชอบของสถาบันการเงินไทยในการให้สินเชื่อกับเขื่อนในแม่น้ำโขงนะคะจริงๆแล้วเนี่ยเดี๋ยวขออนุญาตเสริมที่
I want to also add to what Oi has mentioned. When it comes to both the dams from Chayaburi Dam, Rompabang, and to Bak Bang, we have seen this is a clear-cut example of the lack of capabilities of our mechanisms, such as the mechanisms of by legislation, by law, by court, or even international standards that all the banks have with signatories. That is insufficient. That is the grand overview. I would like to expand about the courts. First off, there is actually a decree that is to courts. Let's go back 4 years ago when it comes to the highest administration court. They has dismissed the Bak Bang because the reason that was dismissal was that when it comes to the public hearing, according to the accordance of the Mekong PNPCA, the court says that it has to be the procedures between two countries, which is that we cannot be Thai law cannot be applicable. It requires international law is beyond their jurisdiction. This is the reason why the attempt with the plaintiff, or when it comes to any enforcement cross-boundary enforcement is not according to the contract. This is one of the major reasons the reason why that 4 years ago that the Bak Bang was dismissed was the highest administration court. Another case that Ms. Oi has touched upon in the next year, that was in 2022. This is the highest administration court. This is dismissed when 37 community members had a court. We call it PPA from Sayaburi Dam. The reason for the court dismissed was that the court says that in summary, the court said that when it comes to the contract of electrical generation purchase does not have a direct impact. According to the court hearing, it says yes, it was just a contract of purchasing of electric, but the impact is about the project that is connected when it comes to contract of purchasing of electrical power. This is one of the reasons why we see it as a limitation when it comes to these guidelines, when it's interpretation for any precedents for any court. This is a major big question. Then the people in the communities, can they rely on the mechanisms of the administration court when it has such a case? That's what I want to touch about in the course. Let's talk about our mission of Fair Finance Thailand. Our major mission is that one of our members of our partners, which is International Rivers, which is monitoring the movement of Sarawin and Kong River continuously. We have attempted to have an open letter or even have many meetings, many kind of formats, meetings inviting of the banks to meet with the community people that were impacted. We had research and feasible study at Chaburi Dam to point out to the banks that what we call the risk EFG, which is quite important of the matter. Afterwards, we have sent many open letters. In summary, what is the reason why international standards is insufficient? This is the reason why. May I give you an example of a case, the latest case that we had a letter about asking about the responsibility of these two projects, which is hydropower, Bak Bang and Rompabang power dams. Our open letter, we refer to the Equator Principles. Equator Principles is the international standard that has been accepted, highly accepted when it comes to leasing our project finances, which are high-risk projects, which is the standard that was developed from IFC, its predecessor, which is a organization of the World Bank. This is the reason why we have the commercial banks such as SCB, Siam Commercial Bank, that has obviously announced accepting the Equator Principles by due diligence when it comes to any creditor. Any banks that will have to use the higher standard, that will be the standard that all banks must follow when it comes to that particular project. And it's one of the reasons why we refer to the Equator Principles for our open letter. I want to have a short summary that last year in August, we had an open letter to show and point out that Luang Prabang project, despite the announcement, and refer that they have followed according to the Equator Principles. We think there are still gaps remaining and many issues that do not follow the Equator Principles, but SCB has authorized the lease, and with many other banks. I want to touch upon that in the benefits of the Equator Principles that we see is the standard that at least we have a clear and transparent information that these commercial banks actually lease out to coordinate projects, because the Equator Principles has released with a high-risk project. But when I said about gaps, according to our open letter, which as of now they haven't replied yet, we gave examples such as we suggested that the companies that are project owners, Luang Prabang hydro dam, they do not have any human rights or environmental impact assessment or even climate change assessment at all. This assessment, when it comes to human rights and climate risk, is one of the criteria, important criteria according to the Equator Principle. We haven't seen that. This is an issue that we have faced the same issue Bak Bang project as well too. We have not seen that the project owner did not evaluation of human rights impact or any impacts of climate change. And we have noticed that when it comes to the impact cross boundaries, if you asked these project companies, Luang Prabang, have they evaluated, assessed transporter impacts? Yes, they did. They did have do some impact and accumulated impacts, but it's just a report that was quite outdated. Which during the report they stated that in 2021, which is the year after the process of the public hearing and inclusion according to the Mekong agreement. So we have a question when it comes to the banks. Do they have any criteria when it comes to the project operations of the project owner? Does it follow to the findings and recommendations from MRC or not, or Mekong River Commission, which is part when it comes to technical review? This is a question, a burning question that we are still asking for them to answer. This is the reason why the 2021 SCB has just accepted the Equator Principle in 2023. There are many other issues besides the Luang Prabang. There's a report from UNESCO that is quite clear that project developments should have an impact, a significant impact, according to the Luang Prabang World Heritage. And we have recommendations from the UNESCO working group that they request that they should relocate the location of the project development. But as of now, the project developers have not replied back. And we had an open letter for this open letter to the banks, which is the owner of the financing of these projects. They haven't replied back. And how are they going to reply back to UNESCO? They haven't replied back. This is specifically for the Luang Prabang project. In August in 2025, we have an open letter, a similar open letter. Now we have submitted to many banks, according to SCB, with SCB is one of them too. This is one of the reasons why when it comes to SCB, the other banks, other commercial banks must also follow with the higher standards. There is a risk and some serious concerns. May I allow to give an example? For Bak Bang project, for instance, there is an evaluation, we call it transboundary and accumulated impacts, but it's an assessment individually according to that project without consideration of the impact accumulation or from the project which is upstream, which is the root, the original projects within China. We can only do only one assessment there because there are many ongoing projects of dams construction in many areas because there will be an impact from the Chinese dams, which is upstream. We haven't forgot to oversee from the other locations downstream. Same thing with the Luang Prabang Dam. There is no evaluation from human rights violation or any risk when it comes to climate change at all. And furthermore, we have voiced our concerns when it comes to toxins in the mines in Myanmar, like Ms. Oy has touched upon, the concerns from CSOs. This is a newfound risk that all the river basins there may be a source of toxins. This is a new hazard, a new threat that the project owners did not submit the report to the banks. But the question is now, what are the banks going to proceed? How can the banks assure confidence that this risk will be managed properly? In summary, we want to point out that despite the fact that the Thai banks may have began accepting the highest standard, which is the Equator Principles, there are still gaps remaining. As we submitted the open letter, we have asked the HQ of Equator Principles as well too. We asked and informed them, these are situations that are occurring in Thailand. There are gaps, and there are not some actors are not following to the procedures. The HQ from Equator Principles replied back, it's not their responsible jurisdiction to follow up onto the banks or even the members of Equator Principle. This is a limitation. May I conclude one more thing, that in the past, when the project developers, they will try to refer to all green and equal standards, not only by the equal principles only, referred or even issue out green bonds. Example, CK Power is a company which is a project owner of Lumpur Bang Dam project. They have issued green bonds in June. And they refer that these green bonds are according to the green bond principles, referring to the Thailand taxonomy. But nonetheless, it's the same thing. We have pointed out that it's a burning question that if you ask the project owner, the CSOs are still having some concerns. Fair Finance Thailand, all these reports that have been developed, some of the articles may not follow the Equator Principle. There is a risk ongoing, and points out that the green bond principles, all these green bonds are still limited and still restricted. Maybe it has the limitations because of the voluntary checklists, self-reporting. They have external or third-party auditors. But the question is that after they dive into the details of all the standards of each project, have they assessed the impact of the CSOs or not? I want to leave with you that despite the fact we may have the Thailand taxonomy, green bond principles may not be enough as tools for regulating the responsibility of project developers. And the Equator Principles that has been issued for financial institutions are still, there are gaps. So I want to conclude the summary. Thank you.
So it's pretty comprehensive. Thank you. And because the time now has passed, so we're gonna open up the floors for about like 2 questions from the audience. Any of you have any questions? If you have questions, just raise your hands and the team's gonna give the mic to you. If there is no questions, thank you so much, our speakers and our audience, for listening to us. So I'm gonna hand over the stage back to MC. So thank you.
The stage, may I have all of you for the group picture together on the stage? You may come in front of the table. Now, on behalf of Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand, I would like to thank you all, the member of the media, the journalist community, for being here with us today and your coverage on these important issues. If you have any further inquiries, please reach out to the panelists or the media liaison person. Kyle Cruz, Influencing and Campaign Manager from Fair Finance Asia, or Kun Ponpakit Prithivongwanit, or Kun Ken, Sustainability Researcher at South Forest and Fair Finance Thailand. Also, please scan the QR code to get the media kit and the press release. This will conclude today's press conference. Now we will have a quick 15 minutes coffee break outside the room. And the next session will be on financial accountability and community voices in Asia's cross-border energy transition. We will resume the next session at 10:30 sharp. So if you have registered for the next session, please join us then. During the break, we also would like to invite you to join the marketplace that organized by Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand. This marketplace is combined partner organization from different countries to showcase their work, share knowledge, and build collaboration. And the marketplace will be open all day. Also, we would like to invite you to sign the signing board outside the room. If you leave the door, you will see the board immediately. And before you get any coffee, may I please have a group picture together at the backdrop outside the room. And thank you so much again for being with us today. And I hope to see you for the next session. If you haven't registered, please make sure you register on the Bangkok Climate Action Week website. Thank you. Enjoy your break. And may I inform you to take all of your belongings with you outside because we will use this room and reorganize it for the next session. สำหรับแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านนะคะรบ
So she reiterated what she just said.
ด้วยนะคะเนื่องจากว่าเดี๋ยวเราจะมีการจัดห้องใหม่สำหรับเซสชั่นถัดไปค่ะ And for anyone who will leave the venue, please remember
สำหรับท่านที่จะเอาออกจากสถานที่ไปนะคะอย่าลืมที่จะคืนหูฟังนะคะ
ออกจากสถานที่นี้แล้วนะคะ
So she just reiterate
ประชาชนกลับด้วยค่ะ We will start the next session very soon. Please get back into the room and take a seat. เรากำลังจะเริ่มเซสชั่นไปนะคะในไม่เกิน1 นาทีนี้กรุณากลับเข้ามาในห้องและเลือกที่นั่งได้เลยค่ะ We will start the session in minutes. Please come back to the room and take a seat. เราจะเริ่มเซสชั่นถัดไปในอีก2 นาทีนะคะกรุณากลับเข้ามาในห้องและเลือกที่นั่งได้เลยค่ะ We will continue the next session in 2 minutes. Please come back into the room and take a seat. เราจะเริ่มเซสชั่นถัดไปนะคะในอีกประมาณ2 นาทีกรุณากลับเข้ามาในห้องและเลือกที่นั่งได้เลยค่ะ For those who would like to have interpretation, we do have interpretation headset available at the registration desk. สำหรับท่านไหนที่ต้องการเครื่องมือการแปลภาษานะคะสามารถรับอุปกรณ์หูฟังได้ที่โต๊ะลงทะเบียนค่ะ For those who are still outside, please come back in and take the seat. สำหรับท่านไหนที่ยังอยู่ข้างนอกนะคะเรากำลังจะเริ่มเซสชั่นถัดไปแล้วกรุณากลับเข้ามาในห้องและเลือกที่นั่งได้เลยค่ะ Good morning again for those who were with us. สวัสดีค่ะแขกผู้มี
Good morning, guests.
Those who are just joining. We would like to welcome you to the opening session of today's crucial dialogue on financing a just, inclusive, and equitable future, mobilizing community and civil society voices for Asia's just transition, organized by Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand. My name is Feen Putisha Kantamanon, and I'm very honored to be your MC for today. Today, we have incredible sessions and speaker lineup ahead of us, and we're so delighted that you are here with us today in this room. Before we begin, I would like to make a few housekeeping items. We have simultaneous interpretation available. The headsets are available at the registration desk. Please test your headset now and adjust the volume. The channel 1 is for English and channel 2 is for Thai. Before you leave the venue, please remember to return the headset back at the registration table and collect your ID card. For our online participant, translation is also available. Please use the interpretation function. เราได้จัดเตรียมล่ามพูดพร้อมสำหรับ
So we have prepared simultaneous interpretations. You can collect the headset at the registrations table. You can test your equipment now and adjust the volume. And you can listen to English from channel 1 and then Thai from channel 2. So before you leave the venue, please don't forget to return the headsets at the registrations table and collect your ID cards. And for those joining online, you can select interpretation function to listen to the translations as well.
In-person attendees, please silence your devices. For those joining virtually, please make sure you mute yourself. Unless you are speaking, drop your comments, question in the chat box. The moderator will indicate when virtual participants can contribute to the discussions. And also, please note that today's session is being recorded and live streamed. So if you would like not to be recorded or photographed, please make sure you take a seat at the back of the room. Outside of today's session, Fair Finance Thailand also have organized an outdoor session, Strides of Solidarity, Run for Climate Justice and Just Transition that leave no one behind at Benjakiti Park Museum entrance. The run will be from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. So please use the QR code to scan for registration if you would like to join. And thank you for your attention. Now we will move on to the next session. This session is titled Financial Accountability and Community Voices in Asia's Cross-Border Energy Transition. To introduce more about this session, may I please invite Imran Arif to the stage.
Sawadee krab and good morning to everyone. Thank you again for joining us for today's event. My name is Imran and I will be your moderator for this session. So before we begin, I just wanted to run through the running agenda that we have for the session. So as we have started with a bit of a delay, we will change some of the timings for some of the agenda items so we can keep to the time, to the original time that we have today. So firstly, I will deliver the opening remarks and frame the topic of the session, followed by inviting Kun Piandan Ditjang or Kun Oi from Ratchang Conservation Group to be able to speak about the consequences of unjust energy transition. We will then move on to the first round of the panel discussion, which is the financial institution responsibility. And for this one, we will have Fair Finance Asia, Fair Finance Thailand, Ratchang Conservation Group, but we won't have the Sustainable Finance Institute Asia, who will be joining in the second round. So on the second round, we will be focusing on taxonomy as the integrity level. So we will feature all the aforementioned panelists in addition to the SFIA. We will then move on to the third round of the panel discussion, which will be discussing the ways forwards and will feature insights from each of the panelists. And then last but not least, we will have a Q&A session, and this will be featuring questions from the floor as well as online participants. So to get things started, to frame the discussion that we have today at hand, across Southeast Asia, cross-border energy investments, especially large hydropower and related infrastructure, typically include transboundary impact assessments. Yet these assessments are frequently not robust, cumulative and basin scale risk are underanalyzed, methodologies and data sets are limited, disclosure is partial, and participation in FPIC, which is free, prior, and informed consent, is uneven, as well as independence verification measures are weak. So to ensure a just energy transition, there needs to be a strengthening of the quality, scope, independence, and transparency of these TIAs, and embedding the findings into financing decisions. This is so that climate action does not reproduce harm. And as well as considering the emerging Thailand and ASEAN taxonomies and IFC performance standards, which can anchor justice, nature positive outcomes, and inclusion if applied rigorously and verified independently. So for this session, our objective is to define what ensuring GAT requires from financial institutions in high-risk cross-border projects so that there can be robust, independent, and publicly disclosed TIAs with true cumulative and transboundary analysis, meaningful participation with FPIC, accessible grievance and time-bound remedies, diversified information sources, and enforceable governance and monitoring. And then we will also cover the turning of the taxonomy criteria at both the Thailand and ASEAN levels into bank internal rules that protect people and nature, which include eligibility, the principles of DNSH, or do not significant harm, MMS, minimal social safeguards, nature positive and GETC indicators, and verification and MRVs, or measurable, reportable, verifiable standards, as well as including quality criteria for robust TIAs. So before we begin our panel discussion in full, I would like to first invite Kun Pianan Jikjang, Kun Oi from the Red Chiang Kong Conservation Group to share more about the consequences of an unjust energy transition. So Kun Oi, if you were able to join us on the stage, Kap.
All right. Hello, everyone. So, distinguished guests, so after the press conference, and I got to stand here today in the stage, a bit concerned whether I could speak on behalf of all Mekong community, but because I received this opportunity to be on this stage, and it's different from other stages that I attend, so I don't want to waste my time and waste my opportunity to ask for responsibility for the financial institutions that decide the life of Mekong locals who are facing severe consequences right now. So my name is Pianan Jikjang from Raksin Kong community, and Raksin Kong community was organized by the Kruti or the Wat Loi Keo, who was active about the dam constructions so far, and I joined as part of the local community. In the past year, I like to reflect about the fight against the constructions of Pak Bang Dam, because we are really worried and we have doubts, and we trying to find an answers. Is it going to turn into overlapping crises that we have to face or no, which is the climate change that we are trying to find, the green power, which is hydro power, and that's why there's a lot of hydropower dams in Mekong rivers at the south of China, which is the upper part of the Mekong rivers. I understand there are already existing 13 dams, and they're building Luang Prabang Dam right now, and Pak Bang Dam are beginning to be constructed starting from this month. because I understand that the constructions company already entered the area. And then after that, there are like other dams that has been through PCA already. So Sanakam Dam, Pak Lai Dam, and Pak Shom Dam. So these are all during like evaluation. And I understand that there will be many more dams to come. And we are really worried. So why we are transitioning the energy, right? We're transitioning just energy transitions, but it's contradictory. It's quite a paradox for us, the locals, because this energy transitions give us severe damages with climate change. There's a lot of like backwater effect. There's a flood inundation. Water doesn't flow. The dam that release water without looking at the volume of water that were in the lower Mekong rivers, and the numerous dams, like hundreds of them, that are at the tributary. So because like water does not like flow naturally, we have lost like the seasonal flow of nature, but now we are faced with like severe consequences of floods and natural disasters. And as I said before about toxins, the toxins will now accumulate and turn into new issues for locals in like Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai are very aware of. So those who like are knowledgeable about toxins, they know that this is like a large scale damage, but they don't know how it's going to turn out yet. So we look at the photograph from the satellite, right? And then we find like there are 500 rare earths mines, and from the government documents and from like international researchers show that we have like 500 rare earths mines. So we can see that there's going to be overlapping crises that Mekong locals have to face, and we don't find solutions yet looking forward. While rare earths or like clean energy for high technology investment that are in the geopolitical conflicts and are in high demand, and every site on every like authority and on every industries. So we cannot like foresee how this issue is going to come into like good conclusions. So that's why we have to demand to the authority, no matter who you are, to take a look at the Mekong River and look at the financial institutions who provide funding for these investments, like the criteria that they should have in investing for the green energies, that so that we could receive less impact among these crises. That's why Raksheng communities and partners, we try to attend every seminars for us to ask for justice. We have gone to the Supreme Court. We have gone to the Prime Minister. We had gone to the Ministry of Energies. We had gone to the lenders. We sent out our disclosed letter, and we even sent out letters to the companies who's developed the projects. And we try to do everything that is possible on our hands to reduce or minimize the impact that's going to take place. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Khun Pianan. So as we move on to the next session, I would like to introduce the speakers that we have for the panel discussion and to invite them on stage. So firstly, we have from Fair Finance Asia, Ms. Bernadette Victorio, who is the program lead of Fair Finance Asia. And then up next, we have Khun Sarini Achawanandukun, Head of Research of Fair Finance Thailand. And then up next, and I do apologize, sincerely apologize for not mentioning him earlier, also Mr. Shubit Sianza, who is the Energy and Justice and ASEAN Engagement Program Manager of the Influencing Just Energy Transition in Asia, or IJET. As mentioned earlier, we will only have the panelists from Sustainable Finance Institute Asia, Ms. Najwa Abu Bakar, who will be joining us in the second session. I'm so sorry. I would just like to re-invite on the stage Kun Piananjit Jang, Right Chang Kong Conversation Group. Hello. So as we begin our session on the responsibility of financial institutes, for this round, we will have a total of 20 minutes discussion. So we will have 5 minutes per panelist to be able to share their insights. So just to kick things off, I wanted to turn the question to Ms. Bernadette from FFA. So as we speak about the responsibility of financial institutes, if you could please share with us from regional evidence, what recurring safeguard failures enable harms in Southeast Asia? And to kind of follow on the question is to also ask if you could explain the responsibility of financial institutions for a just energy transition using hydropower and transition minerals case studies.
Thank you so much, Imran, and thank you so much again, Fair Finance Thailand colleagues, for giving us the opportunity to be part of this panel. So, as mentioned a while ago during the press conference, and for those of you that are just joining today for this session, of course, for large infrastructure projects such as hydropower, and now emerging as well is the transition mineral extractive industries across the region. We have identified in our research the very big environmental and social damages that they have. So specifically referring to our study from last year on Mekong hydropower financing, we identified that it contributes to economic and environmental loss that amounts to about $145 billion, and by 2040 if they are continuing to happen. And this includes loss of forests, wetlands, mangroves, and biodiversity. And essentially for the social impacts, we identified that displaced communities and loss of livelihood, the more affected members of the community are women, specifically because displacement and loss of livelihood, resettlement, they really contribute to increased poverty, mental health stress, heavier burden of unpaid care work, domestic care work among community members. In terms of transition mineral mining, it's very similar. So we have also released a study last year looking specifically at cases from Indonesia and the Philippines. And in those case studies, Of course, we highlight the impact also to indigenous people groups whose lands are being, of course, taken and polluted, leading to loss of livelihood also for them during the mining process. So these gaps are common in both sectors that are emerging, or in the case of hydro is, of course, continuing in the Mekong region. I think in the press con, and I would just highlight it again, we also found out in our research that the financial institutions that are specifically financing hydropower in the Mekong region, not all of them are compliant to international standards. As mentioned by Sarine a while ago, one bank, specifically SCB, was identified to be a signatory to the Equator Principles. But even then, it does not guarantee that they are acting on their commitments or what is expected of them being a signatory of such international standards. With transition mineral mining, it's also very complex, of course, because transition mineral mining, there are several layers of funding and supply chain complexities, and it's very hard for financial institutions and private sector themselves, the extractive companies, to understand the layer of responsibilities that they have, let alone the supply chain complexities that follow when those raw materials are, of course, being used in other production hubs. But I will rather focus on hydropower because, of course, this is the very important topic for Thailand, and I invite those of you who are on site with us or online also to join us more for the transition mineral discussion, which will take place in the afternoon. But I think overall, I would just like to conclude with these couple of points that I think for hydropower, this is considered, as mentioned, a green category if certain criteria are met under the ASEAN taxonomy. And I think we will have a person from our colleague Najwa from SFIA who will join and explain more of this. But of course, already from the assessment that was shared by Sarini in the morning, what does that mean, right? If they are considered green, is there a way for that to create like greenwashing and, really not having a very good way to get the commitments from the banks to do no significant harm if they are just labeling their activities also under the taxonomy in such a way. And very similarly, we also see that even in the engagement on multilateral bank investments, not only on hydropower, but also in transition mineral mining, we see that there is, of course, a lot of interest in increased level of financing there. And therefore, I think it's important to highlight the impacts of cross-border finance. It's important, of course, that we have very strong national level policies and implementation. But at the same time, these are cross-border finance issues that require cross-border solutions. And so if we are going to be able to, encourage race to the top, then that has to happen across the board. It cannot be that one country is leading and the others are continuing to exploit the loopholes. And so I think that's also a message that we have to explore in terms of what is the role of the regional platforms. Is that ASEAN? Is that the ADB? Who are these actors who can help us solve or provide, some pathways for solutions in these issues? Yeah, that's.
Thank you for that, Bernadette, and very pertinent. We're talking about how, due to the transboundary impact, we also need to have the regional standards incorporation. So, you mentioned Gunsarini earlier, so I wanted to segue into my question for you, Gunsarini. So, based on what we just heard from Bernadette, from Fair Finance Thailand's perspective on the Mekong hydropower work. Do banks' project finance practices still fall short of international standards, for example, with the equator principles? If so, could you share one concrete example and explain how that gap can lead to an unjust energy transition?
So I think that, as I mentioned already in the press release, we have articulated, I think, quite in great detail in both instances of our open letter to the banks. So the first one was last year with regards to the Luang Prabang hydropower project. That one specifically was addressed only to SCB, the Siam Commercial Bank, as the first Thai bank to undertake or sign on the equator principles. But then in this year, in August, we sent another similar letter with regards to Pak Bang hydropower, this time not only to SCB, but many other banks that we thought could be lenders to the Pak Bang project. And so there are some differences and some similarities that I already mentioned. For example, we noted that in both projects, the project developer did not undertake the thorough human rights impact assessment or the climate risk impact assessment, even though those are quite key components, key criteria of the equator principles. So basically the tone and what we ask in those open letters is we ask the lenders, first we inform them that the project company don't seem to comply with at least some of the equator criteria, right? And then we ask the lenders to act on that information. Like, for example, we say then if there's these gaps, you should ask the project companies to close the gap, essentially, right? So it's quite unfortunate that so far neither SCB nor the other banks have responded officially to our letter. And I think that is also quite a big challenge that when we sent the letter to SCB last year over Luang Prabang, we also sent it to the Equator Principles headquarters. And we actually got a response, and response was that unfortunately the Equator Principles cannot comment on specific projects of their member banks. So to us, that basically means just a gap in this so-called voluntary standard, is that at the end of the day, what can you do? You know, even though we think we already articulate quite clearly the gaps between the project company and the criteria and the principles. So I think this is one obstacle, I would say, in general, maybe of this kind of voluntary instruments, right? And the other example I want to point out again from the press conference earlier is that one of the project companies, one of the big construction companies in Thailand that's actually building the dams, the CK Power. CK Power is in charge of the Luang Prabang project. They have been issuing green bonds. And the most recent one was a 5 billion baht bond just this past June. And this time they announced quite clearly that this bond adheres to the green bond principles, adheres to the green loans principles, and also the Thailand taxonomy. And so I think just the fact that they could, issue these bonds is actually oversubscribed, so it's quite popular in that sense. The fact that they could issue the so-called green bonds under these principles, even though the underlying project is the same one that we have concerns and we have raised issues about the potential gaps, is another example of the limitation of these standards. So in other words, it's possible then for you to issue so-called green bonds, even evoking international green bond standards, even getting third party to certify that your bond meet, but I'm sure the bond meets certain criteria. For example, the fact that it goes to hydropower, which is designated green. I think that is not incorrect. That's correct, right? But at the same time, there are not enough safeguards to ensure that enough attention is paid on the proper management of environmental and social risk, right? And so I want to say maybe one more thing also about the Thailand taxonomy, because the project company also mentioned that. So Thailand taxonomy, we're already in the fourth year, I think, of taxonomy. The first incarnation of taxonomy several years ago already included energy and transport sector. And basically it includes technical criteria. Technical criteria only looks at the climate mitigation. So basically your project can be designated green if it emits low carbon, for example, so no more than the threshold. But then there are additional criteria. So one is called do no significant harm, DNSH, and I think this is taken from the EU taxonomy methodology. So that means even if your project is green based on the carbon emissions, it still should not be green if it, it doesn't pass the do no significant harm criteria. So this means it should do no harm to other environmental objectives. For example, ecosystems, right? And there's also the minimum social safeguard criteria. That one takes into account the social risk. So what happened in the Thailand taxonomy that Fair Finance Thailand have noticed, and we also sent a lot of comments and suggestions that was not taken up, is that it's still possible for any project to be designated green under Thailand taxonomy, even if it doesn't pass the do no significant harm or the minimum social safeguard, as long as the project issuer, right, activity issuer commits to do this so-called mitigation plan. And then the taxonomy encourage, it's not mandated, but it's encouraging the company to publish that mitigation plan that should basically correct the shortcomings within 3 years. So then our point is that this is a very big loophole that can open up for all sorts of greenwashing, because there are no mitigation plan doesn't refer to any international standard. It just says mitigation plan. So the project company can do whatever they want, basically. There's no mechanism to ensure whether they follow through with the plan or not, right? So they can just publish a plan that looks okay, but if they don't do anything, if they don't do any mitigation, it's still green. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the big loophole that we see in the Thailand taxonomy. And that's basically why, hydropower projects can be designated green, right? Just because I'm sure all the hydropower will pass the technical criteria for low carbon, even if they have high social and environmental risk.
Kunsarini. So very pertinent insight, especially about peeling the layers about seemingly green projects and just understanding the impacts that it has in their development. So moving on to our next panelist, Mr. Schubert, we did want to ask, based on the iJet toolkit, what are the sort of like non-negotiable justice conditions that banks must put into cross-border power deals to call them transition aligned?
Thank you, Imran, and may I start by introducing you to the JET policy toolkit. I think it's right there. There is a QR code. You can use smartphones to access it. It is basically a knowledge portal of matters, documents, references, and resources related to just energy transition. And if I may respond to the question, basically we at Oxfam adheres to the four fundamental and non-negotiable justice conditions in just energy transition. The first one is it should be recognition-based, meaning no one should be left behind, if I may use the ASEAN slogan. That means that in the course of the transition, everybody, all stakeholders in the energy sector should be involved in one way or another. Not just the producers, not just the regulators, but most importantly, the consumers, the end users, and the host communities of energy or power generation plants, so that all their considerations, their aspirations, and their concerns are taken into account and are addressed sufficiently. The second one is procedural justice. This is about substantial participation. So people, communities, consumers should also have a place at the table in designing and developing energy projects. They should be provided a space to articulate their concerns and their aspirations. The third one is distributional. Just energy transition, we call it not just, for us, a big word. It's a four-letter big word because it's about justice. The dominant energy system has perpetuated relationships at various levels that has perpetuated inequality in different forms. And pursuing the pathway to a just energy transition, we are hoping that the shift to renewable sources, renewable energy solutions should also be able to dismantle those barriers that has been traditionally or that the dominant energy system has contributed into. Like, for example, addressing the unpaid care and the domestic work of women, and the dominance of men in the energy sector. If you look at the hierarchy, you know, it's engineering, things like that. So this is a man's world. So women, you go work on desk jobs or whatever else. And we would like to take that opportunity for just energy transition to not just to challenge those entrance barriers, but also to dismantle them. The last one is access to remedy. And this is already enshrined in the United Nations Guiding Principles for Human Rights, that in cases of conflict or tensions in certain communities, impacted communities, the people who are affected most by those energy projects should be able to have access to redress, or they should have access to justice systems that will address their grievances. So I will not go into the details. I'm sure you are very familiar with it. But these are the 4 fundamental justice principles that for us are non-negotiable and should be taken into account in transitioning away from fossil fuel dependence to renewable energy solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Schubert. So last but not least, I would like to move on once again to Kun Pianan. So if I may ask, based on Rak Chang Kong's work and from the community perspective, what are the most urgent demands for grievance, remedy, and justice mechanisms?
Thank you. In truth, when it comes to grievances, this is a struggle that we have prolonged for quite some time, and we'll try to have accessible to financial institutions. Prior to this, in the Sabri Dam, there was a disclosure of those asking for loans, but afterwards, this disclosure was silent. And this is a way, this is some of the criteria, this is intellectual property that cannot be disclosed. That was their address. When it comes to Krimpabang Dam, they create a stage, pressuring. We try to ask them for an answer, all formats, until we call it cross-boundary impact assessment, which has been submitted by a state enterprise, which is EGAT, with their official stamp. And we read through, and it turns out, because we had asked this through their commission or even through our parliament, we had an open letter submitted to the state audit or the Human Rights Commission of Thailand with many commissions in the Thai parliament. It turns out that EGAT replied that there are some criteria such as any purchase or even transborder impact. But it turns out the answer that we asked them wasn't clear. It was ambiguous and wasn't even possible. This is why we searched all channels and we proceeded to the United Nations Human Rights, discussed with the United Nations, UNWG, which is their working group, and asked them to escalate to UNGP. Also included, we tried to discuss with the MRC, the Mekong River Commission, how do we mitigate these impacts. The biggest challenge that we cannot access are the financial institutions. This stage is an opportunity to ask all these organizations, all our activists, because you are the distributors. Source of funds, despite the fact of people who purchase, we're talking about source of funds, source of capital. If there are any criteria besides any address to all the standard operation procedures or any kind of standards, we want to reach of enforcement. If there is a severe crisis, such as accumulated accumulate impacts from all the dams grouped together. Like, we want to invite the banks to listen to us. Don't just read reports. Reports don't tell you nothing. We even asked EGAT. Their officers understand our situation, but they're powerless to do so. Everyone are empathetic to our cause. This is a structure that is pressuring us, when especially of toxins, accumulated toxins. We want all parties, all powers to look into this matter first. This is the major forefront impact of crisis of these dams, besides the dams. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumpian, for that. So I think that's a very pertinent call to action that we need to have, especially across to financial institutions. So as gathering all your thoughts, I want you to kind of like find the levers to kind of help to address the situation at hand right now. So as we have been discussing earlier, about the Thailand and ASEAN levels of taxonomy as being these levers. So if I were to move on to the next session, we will have 25 minutes for the session. So yet again, about 5 minutes per panelist. So I would like to, for this session, invite Ms. Najwa Abu Bakar from the SFIA to join us on. Maybe before Ms. Najwa joins us, maybe we can start with Mr. Schubert to kind of like have some experience from the IJET toolkit. So in reference to using the Thailand and ASEAN taxonomies as a lever, or specifically in your experience, the ASEAN taxonomy, so looking across the ASEAN taxonomy and national level ones, what are the most critical remaining gaps that risk transition, washing, and social harm, especially around activity level, social safeguards, amber coal phase-out credibility, and verification?
Let me try to respond to that, although I'm not an expert on the taxonomy, but just to give you an overview what it's all about, the ASEAN Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance is a common reference and an overarching guidance that was agreed by the ASEAN member states to facilitate the investments and financing for sustainable activities. So it sounds good, right? We are very happy to, we welcome this development because in the Asia, ASEAN is the only functional intergovernment body that has the ability to convene member states and come up with regional agreements for further guidance. And we are also glad to note that several ASEAN member states have already adopted their national taxonomies, and several others are currently developing their taxonomies. The main challenge that we see in the taxonomy is it's a guidance. In the language of the ASEAN, that means it's a voluntary guidance. It's not, legally binding, if I may use that word, like a treaty. And I think our mandate, but we look at it as an opportunity because it is already there for us to be able to engage financing institutions. And what we would want to do now is to be able to engage at the ASEAN member state level. Each country, ASEAN is very diverse, so each member state, they have a different context. So in each member state, we try to engage and we try to come up with more meaningful national taxonomies that can actually be enforced and can actually penalize anyone who violates those standards as reflected in the taxonomy. Now, there are different ways of doing this, and I'm not going into that. But I think what is most important is to, our mandate as Oxfam is to work with the people, work with the communities, and I think the most important priority for us is to be able to enhance the capacities of the people and community that we work with in being able to engage local and national governments to have more meaningful national policies that will actually safeguard, ensure the accountability of financing institutions, ensure the well-being of communities in projects that are being invested by financial institutions, and be able to elevate their voices and claim their space at the table and convey their aspiration and their concerns to the government. So I think that's the most important thing. The second one, and this is my last point, is perhaps the ASEAN will consider a regional arbitration mechanism, because we are talking about transboundary investment. So money coming from somewhere else, like for example, maybe invested in the Philippines, has displaced several communities. What will be the access to remedy? How will the impacted communities pursue their grievances? So we need that regional mechanism to complement the ASEAN Taxonomy Board to be able to effectively ensure that what is aspired for in the taxonomy, in the regional taxonomy board, is actually being followed, it's actually being enforced, and people who are violating it are actually being penalized. And those who are affected are actually able to get justice from it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Schubert. Just seeing that Ms. Najwa has actually joined us online over here. So I wanted to kind of like move back to her to kind of shed a bit more light on what the SFI's perspective is on this. So essentially, if you could maybe give us a bit of insights about the role of the ASEAN taxonomy, especially at the regional level, to ensure the just energy transition. I'm sorry, Najwa, I don't think we can hear you. Apologies, everyone. Just a slight technical hiccup. Najwa, we are really sorry, but as we are trying to fix this technical the sound difficulties, maybe I can move on to our other panelists first, but we'll promise to get back to you in time to share your insights. So maybe to Kun Serini instead this time. So from Fair Finance Thailand's perspectives, what do you see as being the key gaps in Thailand Taxonomy 2.0? and the implications for the just transition and for cross-border energy finance? And if I were to follow up on that question, is to kind of see how should regulators and banks use the taxonomy to move towards a just energy transition in Thailand?
So just to maybe recap my earlier point that so in the case of hydropower project, I think it's very clear that the taxonomy, the Thailand taxonomy as it is inadequate, right? Because even if you pass technical criteria for low carbon, it's still okay for you to be designated green, even if you don't pass the minimum social safeguard or the do no significant harm criteria. And then we think the so-called mitigation plan is too loose and it's not referring to any international standard. So for us, that's a big opening for greenwashing. I think I just want to add a little bit more detail also that when we submitted the Fair Finance Thailand comments and suggestions to the draft Thailand taxonomy, this was a couple of years ago, back when they were doing energy and transport, we were quite specific in our recommendations. So for example, for hydropower, we said that since Thailand is already modeling the methodology after EU taxonomy, then it should adopt basically the safeguards in the EU taxonomy for certain high-risk activities. So for hydropower, for example, EU taxonomy says very clearly that the project developer or the issuer has to account for the cumulative impacts, right, of other projects in the same watershed area, and which is exactly what the Thailand civil society has been asking for the longest time. And yet, Thailand taxonomy does not include that. So I think it's very clear that they do. So basically adopt some, some criteria from the EU taxonomy, but not all, and not the most critical ones. So this is just another example of why we think that's a very clear gap. That's not that positive in that sense. But looking forward, I think that Thailand taxonomy could be very useful if, first, Thailand will have the climate change law coming up hopefully very soon. If not this year, then maybe next year. It will be the first climate change law in the country. And it's already quite clear to us that there will be a climate change fund. So there'll be some, funding under that law. And the criteria for who can access that funding and which activities. I think given the latest rounds of suggestions hosted by the DCCE, the Department of Climate Change, it will likely partly be anchored on the Thailand taxonomy. So in other words, if you have activities or projects that you want funding from the Climate Change Fund, you go look up the Thailand taxonomy. So this will be one clear use case for Thailand taxonomy going forward. But of course, we think our concerns about, the greenwashing have to be closed. But that's one thing. The second opportunity is that we have been suggesting since the first draft of Thailand taxonomy as Fair Finance Thailand that the Bank of Thailand should mandate all financial institutions to report based on the Thailand taxonomy and make the reporting mandatory disclosure to the public also. Because I think that would be a very key element of pushing the banks for more accountability, and then we would have much more information about which banks is doing or sponsoring what kinds of so-called green or yellow projects, right? So as the latest that we heard from the Bank of Thailand is they are in the process of making Thailand taxonomy part of the reporting requirements. Although it's challenging because banks are not used to tagging the activity level of their clients. You can imagine if I lend like working capital, right? Usually it's a firm-wide thing. It's not really, banks don't have to go down and see specific projects. So this is challenging for them. But so right now, Bank of Thailand told us that, okay, they're in the process of making it a reporting requirement, and then they will see about then making it then a public disclosure requirement. So we think that from that perspective, that would be another very beneficial use of the Thailand taxonomy. So from Fair Finance Thailand perspective, we're not so interested in, how much, how many billions of baht of funding can be raised through Thailand taxonomy, but we see it as more of an important tool. So as a tool for public reporting and disclosures, and also as a tool for earmarking access to climate fund, and potentially other similar funds that will come up in the future. So that's kind of right now our perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Khun Sarini. So looking forward to how the climate fund and climate law be in the works, but of course, getting past the barriers and challenges that we see with the taxonomy. So I believe we should have resolved our technical issues for now. So Ms. Najwa, thank you for your kind patience. So just to go back to you again, I wanted to ask a question on your perspectives, essentially on the role of the ASEAN taxonomy at the regional level to ensure the just energy transition.
Hi, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me now. Are we good? Okay, so good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. And I'm really sorry that I'm not able to join you in person. I think one of the speakers, I'm sorry I didn't catch your name, was able to actually explain what the ASEAN taxonomy is. But if we go to slide 8, I thought maybe just give you a bit of an overview of what the ASEAN taxonomy is and why a regional taxonomy is needed. So it is a common language, as already mentioned, and it is used to drive sustainable finance, in which it is a classification framework that allows and provides information, consistent information to financial institutions, and that means providers of capital as well as users of capital, a consistent definition of what is and is not a sustainable investment, right? Now, then why do you need a regional taxonomy when there are already national taxonomies that exist? National taxonomies are there to consider national priorities and ambitions, and the regional taxonomy, i.e. the ASEAN taxonomy, is a common language that brings together the 10 countries, right? So what it does is it facilitates equivalence between the national taxonomies. So it's an overarching guide. When we speak to stakeholders, this is precisely why the ASEAN taxonomy exists. There are too many taxonomies, from the EU taxonomy to the member states taxonomies, and most of the bank's internal taxonomies. At our last count, there were about a total of almost 200 taxonomies, sustainable finance taxonomies, between the bank's internal frameworks, the official taxonomies, and also others, right? So we need to try and minimize the fragmentation so that everyone is speaking the same language with respect to sustainable finance. There needs to be consistency and clarity and credibility for capital to actually move into sustainable activities. That is the role of the ASEAN taxonomy, right? And taxonomies in general. So I just wanted to set the context of what a taxonomy is, what its role is, and its intent to move capital towards sustainable activities. Okay? Now, if you go to slide 14 and 15, just a quick overview. 7 out of, I think, the 10 ASEAN member states have their own taxonomies. Malaysia actually has 2, it's principles based. Singapore has the Singapore Asia taxonomy. Thailand is already in phase 2 of the taxonomy. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that also Indonesia is now up to version 2 of the taxonomy. Vietnam just came up with the taxonomy, the green taxonomy, and the Philippines as well, which is principles based. So all these taxonomy, and if you go to slide 18, you'll find that the developers of the ASEAN taxonomy are also the developers of the national taxonomy. So the idea is that there is alignment between the ASEAN taxonomy and the national taxonomies with respect to the architecture of the taxonomy, the design of the taxonomy, and also the activities which are covered in the taxonomy. There are 4 work streams that form the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, which includes the capital markets, central banks, and also insurance. So these are the 4 sectoral bodies under the ASEAN Finance Cooperation Process. And these are the members. So I think just to go back a little bit, the sustainable finance ecosystem in ASEAN comprises the taxonomy, also comprises the transition finance guidance or the ASEAN Transition Finance Guidance, as well as 2 other pillars, which is disclosures and also demand and supply. Both all need to work together, but the taxonomy is a taxonomy, right? Now, one of the things that I want to go to is slide 24 because it relates to transition. The ASEAN taxonomy from day 1 has incorporated the transition imperative. If you look at principle number 2, in designing the taxonomy itself, not only does it have to take into account widely used international taxonomies such as the EU taxonomy and other relevant taxonomies such as the national taxonomies, it has to facilitate an orderly transition. These are nice words, I understand, but the ASEAN taxonomy is very serious about it in that in its design, if you go to the next slide, if you go to slide 26 and 27, right, the transition element is reflected in the amber or transition categories. So the ASEAN taxonomy is also a transition taxonomy in that it was a novel approach when it first came out in 2021, where we included the amber categories, and now all the ASEAN member states taxonomies have also incorporated this element. It uses a traffic light system And the amber categories are not meant to be there forever. It needs to be sunset depending on activity and depending on focus sectors. So the design of the taxonomy is such, and this is common across taxonomies, that you have environmental objectives that you want to address and you have essential criteria. The EU taxonomy only has do no significant harm and MSS, right? And MSS, the ASEAN taxonomy calls that the social aspects. Remedial measures to transition is to facilitate transition because in ASEAN, because of the diversity in ASEAN with respect to GDP per capita, with respect to emissions profiles, with respect to the fact that there's no common net zero target, and also, socio-economic differences in the ASEAN member states, of which there are 10, it is recognized that ASEAN cannot transition overnight, and therefore this category is there to enable activities that are not green now to move on a pathway to green. So if you see the next slide, slide 27, I think there's something wrong now with the presentation. Are you seeing the presentation so far?
From our end, can we just have a look?
Sorry. I think it's gone missing. Sorry. Presentation, I think there's a connection issue.
Huge. Because you are projecting the slides, not us.
Yeah, I was disconnected just now. I'm back. Can everyone see my slide?
No, we can't.
Yes.
Last night.
Yeah, we do. We see this. You shouldn't. It's not there anymore.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but the slides are not showing.
Yes, we can. But
Yep, now I can see them.
So sorry about all the connection issues. But I will wrap up quite quickly on this transition thing so that we can go on to the other question.
Sorry, Najwa. Just before you get to the wrap up, I'm afraid there's a bit of an issue with the audio quality again. Sorry, just give us a moment. Sorry, Najwa, could you try speaking?
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I think we can hear you now. Yeah, thank you. Okay, please continue.
Yeah, I think this connection thing is a transition issue. So basically, the way the taxonomy also demonstrates its seriousness on transition because of the diversity in ASEAN is through the amber categories, right? As I mentioned, it's both in the principles-based layer, which was the plus standard, and also, the principles-based layer, which is called foundation framework, and the metric-based layer called the plus standard. So what does amber mean? It means, or transition, right? It means that it contributes to one of the EOs, it still causes harm to the others, but it needs to remediate. In the plus standard, which is a criteria based, it's a transitional activity. It doesn't meet green. It is on a progressive path. And you have to give due consideration to the practicalities of implementing these activities, right? So the amber criteria is not supposed to be there forever. So for example, in the energy focus sector, the amber 3 criteria of the plus standard needs to be sunset in 2030, whereas the amber 2 criteria needs to be sunset in 2040. So activities that haven't made improvements to be in the green criteria will have to lose their categorization or classification, right? I think one of the questions also said, oh, who's monitoring this and who's making sure these things happen? So the ASEAN taxonomy's role is also very clear in the coming up with the guidance and coming up with the recommendations, right? So I think the idea about sustainable finance is that it has to also be a whole of economy approach. It is not just one party and not the others. Policymakers are involved, real economy is involved, banks are involved. So I think the idea, platforms such as this, where conversations have to take place, have to happen and continuously has to happen in order for it to be in order for there to be a demand and supply of sustainable finance. I'm quite happy to share use cases later of companies that have used the taxonomy to raise sustainable finance so that sustainable projects can actually occur. I might just take a pause at this point in time.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Najwa. And thank you for showing the patience, and especially for our guests, both over here online as we sort out the technical difficulties. So thank you for explaining in detail regarding the ASEAN taxonomy, and that was something that has been driving our conversations today. I would like to move on to Ms. Bernadette, just as a segue as to what Ms. Najwa was speaking about, especially on how civil society can leverage ASEAN and national taxonomies to engage financial institutions.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Najwa, for joining us. So within the Fair Finance Asia Network, actually, we've started following the development of the ASEAN taxonomy since its first version. And we have, of course, used that opportunity also to build capacity among civil society organizations within our network to understand what is it, right? Is it a, the taxonomy was, of course, a very new term to most of us when it started, and now, as mentioned by Najwa, and looking at, the and the emergence of many national taxonomies being developed, there are 200, as she mentioned already at this point. It's been really essential for us to have used that time to build the capacity within the network. In fact, just last week or a couple of weeks ago, the Fair Finance Asia Network submitted our comments to the version, the upcoming version of the taxonomy being under development with SFIA and Najwa's team. So I think from our perspective, it's really important for national civil society organizations to engage at the national level when these taxonomies are being developed. And that's exactly what Fair Finance Thailand is doing. And that is actually excellent because they understand what the issues are, how to connect it with the important advocacy issues that they're working on. In this case, for Fair Finance Thailand, it's hydropower financing. For other coalitions within our network, such as in Indonesia, where we have a very active engagement, for example, from our coalition Responsi Bank, they were also very much providing feedback on the national level taxonomy in Indonesia with regards to fossil financing, and that has been also very fruitful engagement. And the same with the Philippines, because in the Philippines also our coalition has been actively engaged with the Sustainable Finance Roadmap, and again highlighting the advocacy topics that are very important to the coalition. And so at the regional level, we try to consolidate all these feedback and comments that we are seeing at the national level engagements, and then consolidating them and providing them at the feedback, the regional feedback level, for example, at the submission that we have provided, as I mentioned, to Najwa and her team just a couple of weeks ago. We think that while many of the topics that are covered under taxonomies are quite technical for civil society organizations to really kind of engage with in very detailed form. So even with Najwa's team, when we engage, we are like, we're not going to discuss like what the thresholds of carbon emissions or GHG emissions for specific sectorial priorities in manufacturing or whatnot. It's not going to be the level probably of engagement that civil society will expect unless they have very scientific knowledge in-house to provide such comments. But what's important is really to understand the coverage of the sectorial priorities, to understand the science-based alignment of these targets, to understand the time-bound commitments, both at the national and regional levels. Again, whether they are aligning with science-based evidence, and more importantly, on the monitoring and the disclosures that need to happen hand in hand. Because as mentioned already within the panel, taxonomy is not mandatory. It's voluntary. Banks themselves might use or prefer to use their own taxonomies, or they would adhere to different guidance. And whether they do use the ASEAN taxonomy or the national level taxonomy, I think it's very important to mention that that would only be as effective if they are also disclosing on the targets and how they are operationalizing such compliance. Because otherwise, what would be, the monitoring mechanism for civil society to cross-check on that? So from the perspective of civil society, there also has to be a way for us to say that, okay, as mentioned by Sarene a while ago, there are many potential loopholes, right? If something is considered green, for example, under the taxonomy, which enables them to, call such projects green or issue green bonds related, mechanisms for those. And unless there is really very transparent way for civil society to track what criteria they are being considered under green, or what specific disclosures the financial institutions are providing in order for civil society to really verify those, then yeah, that wouldn't really be as effective. So stop there.
Thank you, Bernadette. So just to wrap things up for this session, and I am conscious that we're running a bit short on time, so if I could maybe ask Khun Tianan, having heard the inputs from the rest of the panelists, what would you be your reflection on the ideas regarding the taxonomies?
ค่ะ
All right. So I'm trying to understand about the taxonomy from like each one. I know one is for monitor, but I'm going to talk about the facts that happens actually on the field. So why the lenders, the bank has their own taxonomy, right? The constructions company has their own taxonomies, and so with the CSO to like it's like guidance. So imagine like people in Chiang Rai and Chiang Mai. So it's just Chiang Rai. So we both on like the dam. So it was the right legal concessions, right? And they have like all these criteria and standards. But we're still with another like way of funding, which is from the mine. Mine was illegal, and understanding for people in the area, and the money that's flowing into the mines were not legal either. But the dam was legal, so I think there's like another loophole that happens, that they escape from the standards that we try to build for them. This might be a bit like pessimistic, but this is what we're facing. So if you look through the supply chains, like the big buyers that has monopoly, they would say that, oh, this is not scientific. So we just monitor everything now, like both environmental and the supply chain, the health, and we have to continue doing this with a really bad mental illness. So whatever is the tools and standards, we want this to like happen as soon as possible. And I think the financial institution understands sometimes the flow of the money and how does money get like laundering from like illegal into legals, and we cannot like nowadays like pinpoint, oh, this come from these companies and where this like minerals goes to and what like this green energy is supporting right now. So I feel like we're drowning here, and that's why we ask for like everyone's to help us.
And then for having a wrap up, and more elements to consider just beyond what we have discussed here today. So just moving on to our final session, which is more of a wrap up and looking at the way forward. So unfortunately, we are running a bit short on time. So originally I wanted to ask each of the panelists to give maybe about 5 minutes to kind of like look at the way forward. But I think based on the time we have, maybe if we could just have 2 minutes to kind of speak about it. So based on discussion today, maybe I can put the question to Kun Sarini first to kind of like give your thoughts on how we can move this forward.
I'm actually a bit optimistic about the role of civil society actually. So I think that overall civil society does not need to understand what goes into the technical criteria of whether it's taxonomy or green bonds or anything at all. Because I think civil society already knows and work on what they know best, which is basically the specific issues and problems, right, in their own local communities and work areas. So I would encourage that civil society just needs to articulate for example, the impacts, especially the negative impacts of activities and projects, especially the so-called green projects. I think that already is something that whatever standard the issuer and the project company adopts, they have to be mindful of, right? Because nobody would want to be seen as, claiming themselves as green, but having some negative impacts. So I would encourage, this is just maybe civil society just needs to maybe think of ways to communicate the impacts more broadly and more directly to the issuers themselves, and also as well as I think to the standard owners, right? Because I think right now there's a plethora of green standards in the world right now, and it's actually a very, I would say, a very competitive space. Even when we're talking about green bonds, there's not one green bond principles. There's several green bond standards. Like CBI has its own climate bonds principles, for example. So I think one of the selling points of these standard setters, the owners, is they want to be seen as credible. They want to be seen as their standard can really separate between like the really green and the non-green. So that means they have to really put more attention going forward to the potential of greenwashing, the rigorousness of the monitoring and reporting process. And that is, I think, exactly where civil society in every country and communities can engage with.
Thank you, Kun Sarini. Maybe if we could move on to Bernadette, we could share perspectives on how we can move forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. Following what Sarine mentioned and her optimism for the civil society role, yes, of course, with Fair Finance Asia, we believe that the civil society has a very important role, and I will not repeat already what she said. But I think it's also important to mention that not everybody or not all civil society has the same status or relationship level as in Fair Finance Thailand, right? In many countries where Fair Finance Asia operates, there's a lot of restrictions for civil society to even engage with financial institutions, issuers, or even with their own government that are developing taxonomy. I think it's important to remember that shrinking civic space is, very clear and present risk for civil society. To engage even at the level of taxonomy is not always open for them. Yeah. So yes, communication is very important. whoever their main target audience is for that. Those messages of, highlighting the impacts is really important. But I think that's also where we emphasize the level of capacity for civil society to be able to articulate those impacts and to be able to articulate that they are able to connect those, even if they're not even talking about technical knowledge, right? It's even just making sure that even platforms like SFIA will be able to open up their doors and say, okay, maybe they are saying something important that we can take into account. So that's where the level of research, the level of capacity building is important for civil society, because by experience, we know that that opens doors. And that opens doors even in the most difficult shrinking civic space kind of landscape. So yes, we are positive that civil society can play a role. And I think it's important to mention here that the cross-border solution is there, right? So where shrinking civic space is a problem in many countries, there is a way for us to lift the discussion out at the regional level, up at the regional level, and perhaps use connections where the cross-border issue is pertinent. If it's hydropower and there's restriction in Laos and Cambodia, that's where we rely with Fair Finance Thailand to maybe lift up those issues at the national and international level, especially if cross-border finance is involved. Same for other thematic areas where cross-border finance is also involved and where we are facing the risks of shrinking civic space and where there might be restrictions somewhere else, but the topics can be raised elsewhere. So that's where the strength of the coalition of Fair Finance is something that we want to leverage on and work together.
Thank you, Bernadette. And quite pertinent point, basically, in talking about the different levels of action that CSOs can engage with, but to work together to have strong engagement. So I would like to then move on to Mr. Schubert, if you could provide some of your comments on the way forward.
Hello, we think that the taxonomy is an opportunity. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? And it's a huge step for the ASEAN, actually, considering the complexity of the ASEAN. It's a very brave thing to do. It has its limitations, obviously. And for me, maybe we can do something like CSOs can do a taxonomy watch, ASEAN taxonomy watch. Let's see how it's rolled out. Let's see how it responds to the lights. What happens to the green light, orange light, and red light? Let's see how ASEAN responds. And perhaps we can take that opportunity to, ventilate or convey our recommendations to make it more relevant, meaningful to the communities. My second point, 2025 is a critical year for the ASEAN because this is where they will agree on the next cycle of work plans. So ASEAN has like 5-year work plans, right? So the 2026 to 2030 work plan will be adopted presumably in Kuala Lumpur during the November summit there. And one of the processes that we are keenly following up is the development of the ASEAN Plan of Action on Energy Cooperation, APAEC 2026 to 2030. That is something like, for example, top of my head, I would like a reference to the ASEAN taxonomy in APAEC 2026-2030. I would like a reference in APAEC about the ASEAN ASEAN Minerals Cooperation Action Plan, to those who would be interested to join the session later this afternoon. I would like the ASEAN ASEAN Declaration on Promoting a Regional Care Economy reflected in the mentioned in the APAEC 2026-2030. And then lastly, there is this thing called ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement that we seldom hear about. Now, it is an agreement. It has a higher legal status than a declaration and a statement. It can be a treaty, who knows? We've never dived deep into it. But it is also related to finance. So that is something that perhaps I would encourage colleagues to look into, because it will certainly affect the next 5 years of our lives as ASEAN citizens, because it's a 5-year plan. And I'll stop there. One last thing, very important. We need to strengthen access to remedy. Whatever form, whatever form it will take, as long as the community, because right now things are happening, right? Communities are being impacted. They cannot simply wait. And we need to enable those effective access to remedy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schubert. So just being aware of the remaining time that we have, maybe I could pass this on to Ms. Najwa if you could provide some of your inputs on the way forward. But if possible, I would kindly request if you could give it maybe within about 1 minute, just so we can move on to the Q&A session afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. And I take into account all the feedback. I think engagement is very, very important for the ASEAN Taxonomy Board. So for the past 4 years, we have consistently engaged with ministries, financial institutions, civil society organizations, etc., during our stakeholder consultation sessions, but also during the development of the taxonomy itself, during the criteria. So I think I may disagree slightly that I think, I do think stakeholders should have some level of interest on the basis and methodology and the references that the taxonomy comes up with. I think it's important in order for it to be there to be feedback. And we always say this: the taxonomy and sustainable finance frameworks are always a balance of ambition and reality. And this brings me to really the next point. And just before we go to the next point, I think we're very happy to get feedback from civil society organizations that we have engaged. It's not just Fair Finance Asia, it's also others, especially during the development phase. And version 4 of the taxonomy, which is a completed version, is targeted to come out in November, and that's the feedback that we've taken. Just as an example, to one of the speakers who said how engagement can be encouraged, is also, for example, this year the World Green Building Councils came up with a report in September. I'm quite happy to share the link with our contacts at Fair Finance. What they did was to take all the cohort of green building rating tools, and they did a report on benchmarking these tools to the ASEAN taxonomy. The result was that they found a significant alignment in climate change mitigation environmental objectives, with improvements for adaptation, right, for that other objective. So this is something that I think we can talk about. As I said, the ATB is very open to feedback. And the second point, which is most important, one of the things that's been really, really challenging specifically this year as a taxonomy board and as the secretariat to the taxonomy board is the global pullback in climate ambition and climate initiatives, right? But it is challenging because funding is being taken away. You'll notice what's happened to NZBA with the exit of financial institutions from that. So this is something that the regulators feel, but I think it's also fair to say that ASEAN is going to continue with its own sustainability push. So I think we have to take the global landscape into consideration and what ASEAN wants to do to keep pushing the sustainability agenda. And there are already 5 use cases of corporates using the ASEAN taxonomy criteria to either raise sustainability-linked loans or blue loans that happened for Thai Union this year in March. There's also Bangkok Expressway that used the ASEAN taxonomy criteria. In Philippines, BDO Unibank used the ASEAN taxonomy criteria. In Malaysia, Wasco Berhad used the sustainability, the ASEAN taxonomy criteria. So my point in this is that there needs to be cooperation, especially during these challenging times. And I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Najwa, for succinctly delivering the wrap-up on that. So last but not least, I would like to ask Kun Pianan if you had any more concrete kind of actions that you would like to share on your behalf of Ratchankong on the way forward.
As of now, I have witnessed the new tools and filled in what are the things that we're going to drive forward. On the aspect when it comes to the CSOs, we have to do on alignment in parallel. We have to gather at our communities of impact. And we have to make to understand about the areas of impact and the damages. And we have to witness that what tool, what framework are we going to apply, despite the fact that we may, in a crisis that is quite complex and a lot of layers. But we must move forward nonetheless. And I hope that this stage and our stakeholders will have some perspectives to recommend us to move forward. And I would like to thank for this opportunity for us as a CSO to participate and hear about the tools on the stage. Thank you.
Pianan. So that comes the wrap for the discussions for today. So if I could maybe kind of like summarize based on the different experiences and insights of our speakers here today is that it's taxonomies are a good way forward, but of course there needs to be more rigorous standard setting, especially in alignment with leading international standards for it to be more effective. And of course considering the roles of different CSOs and communities, especially at the regional level, to ensure they can be mobilized to improve their engagements with their respective governments and on the regional basis. So we'll now move on to the Q&A session. So for this one, we would like to open the questions to the floor. We are running on a bit of a shortened time. So maybe we could spare about 10 minutes for the questions. And if anyone has any questions for the panelists from the floor, yes. So we can collect a few questions, maybe we can go at once. If anyone is ready, maybe you can just raise your hands up and we'll pass the microphone over to you later.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Vidvata Sharma and I'm from Global Methane Hub. We're a philanthropic organization that focuses on methane emission reductions as an emergency brake for climate change to stay on the 1.5 degree pathway. My question was to the panel and to Najwa in particular about the amber category, because gas particularly, and I also see the mention of agriculture and circular economy, these do have significant methane implications. So is that something that's considered in the Asian taxonomy already? Because even if we say that LNG production, for example, needs to stop completely, there's still something that the energy companies can do in terms of methane mitigation that can have a significant impact even in the short term. So is that something that's being considered as part of even the Asian and the national taxonomies that are being developed? That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Najwa, before you could answer that, maybe you can gather a couple more questions from the audience, if they have any. Maybe perhaps from our online participants, any questions? Okay, if not, maybe Najwa, over to you.
Thank you for the question. It's a good one. If you look at the structure of taxonomies and the criteria itself, not only, especially for the TSC-based taxonomies, not only do you have to meet the emissions criteria for either green or amber, but at the same time, because there is the do no significant harm, you cannot cause harm to the other environmental objectives. But within the criteria, even for mitigation, there is specific wording that you cannot allow leakages, right? Be it methane or others. So it is being considered, not just at green, but also at amber.
Okay, thank you, Najwa. So just one last call for any questions that the audience has. Okay. Yeah, I think everyone's eager to go to lunch, but I did actually have just one question, and this is open to any of the panelists who might want to answer. It can be multiple. So, to make taxonomies actually shift capital out of fossil into community benefiting renewables, especially in cross-border projects, what minimum disclosure and independent verification should supervisors require in terms of what's published, who verifies, how grievances and remedies are tracked, and how should this be enforced consistently across ASEAN and national regimes?
So I'm going to talk in terms of the role of banks, right? Essentially now all the big banks have announced net zero goals. And I appreciate that what Kunasho was mentioning, the pushback and the withdrawal actually of some global banks from the Net Zero Banking Alliance, for example. But the momentum is still here, I think, in ASEAN. And so I think that all the banks that have announced net zero goals need to then back it up with a credible transition plan. And the transition plan of banks mean undoubtedly the glide path, very clear sectoral glide path, especially in their heaviest, highest carbon sectors, which of course includes energy. So I think it's just a matter of, demanding the banks and also the central bank to not only to mandate but also assist. I think the banks in not only creating these transition plans, the credible transition plans, but also to help them with capacity building. I think there's a lot of knowledge that can be shared across the region by, for example, banks in countries that have kind of seem to move ahead already. For example, in Singapore, several banks already have published quite clear transition plans and glide path. So I think there's a lot of knowledge that can be learned, and I think that civil society definitely should be part of this conversation as well. To see and to suggest whether these plans are credible or not. Because I think there already exists a lot of guidelines and on how banks can set credible climate goals, right? So for example, when you announce net zero goals, you need to set short-term, medium-term, long-term plan, what that involves, what kind of governance structure. So there's a lot of already very useful information. So I think it's just a matter of getting the banks to share across countries maybe, and the role of central bank is also important, because the Bank of Thailand is still I would say only taking initial steps in this sense. Yeah, but I'm sure in the coming years we'll hear much more about transition plans of banks. We hear more about credible climate commitments, glide path of banks, and that's where the conversation needs to be at. Yeah.
Good way to wrap up.
Say something, please?
Yes, please, Najwa, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I know you're running out of time. I will probably just say again, it takes a whole of economy approach, not just sectoral approach for that matter. So it's financial institutions, policymakers, civil society, government agencies and ministries all have to work together, number one. Capacity building, which is something that's been mentioned, is very, very important. We have heard for 4 years now that even, especially at national level, right? It's not just regional level, but I think capacity level building is more important at national level so that users understand how it affects them. And I think also part of that is education on how beneficial it is to use the taxonomy, right? And how it affects them, right? There must also be a case, I think, and this is where I say whole of economy comes in again, incentives of using the taxonomy. People have to be able to see that the cost of capital is lower in trying to go for sustainable finance. And I think the thing that has to come in also is that the transition finance guidance, for example, the ASEAN transition finance guidance and the ASEAN taxonomy, which are meant to work together, should be applied together. So for example, the ASEAN taxonomy is a classification at that point in time, right? And it will be ratcheted down, the criteria will be ratcheted down and strengthened over time. But the ASEAN transition finance guidance gives guidance on transition planning for companies over a period of time, and they can use the taxonomy's benchmarks in order to set the targets. But also, I think engagement specifically there has to be more engagement for SMEs and MSMEs because there's 70 million plus of them in the ASEAN region. So we need to be able to also reach out to them and capacity build with them and engage them. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So yesterday we had a session about disclosures on task force and inequality related financial disclosures. And I remember there were a couple of representatives from Thai banks and they were sharing their thoughts about disclosures. And obviously they were quite, of course, very open to say, of course, we will not disclose if it makes us look bad, right? So they will only disclose information that, they are happy to share if, it makes the bank's reputation looks good. And I think that says a lot about disclosures, right? Like, unless there is a very clear mandatory requirement for them to do that, then they would disclose what needs to be disclosed. And perhaps that's my point, is that we engage a lot with financial institutions as Fair Finance Asia and Fair Finance Thailand in our national level coalitions because that's our main primary target audiences. But more importantly, I think in the context of Asia, our region, policymakers and regulators have a very important role to set the tone at the, policy level ecosystem and creating an enabling policy environment for financial institutions to follow that guidance. So everything we're talking about in taxonomy is voluntary. But unless there is a very clear mandatory guidance coming from the regulators for them to set base standards on monitoring, on disclosures, on even creating very clear criteria on what is a credible transition plan with the inputs from civil society, then I think we will remain also in this voluntary space that they do it, they don't do it. So yeah, my opinion is that there has to be a very important mandatory component for these as well to work.
Bernadette, yeah, and that's something that I think collaboratively we could kind of like look forward to making it mandatory, not voluntary, to ensure more effective action. So I think that's a wrap up for our panel discussion. So I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists very much for taking the time to join our session today. So to Ms. Bernadette, to Kun Sarini, Mr. Schubert, Kun Pianan, and of course Ms. Najwa for joining us today. So yeah, now everyone's eager for lunch. So thank you, of course, to our audience, both over here and online, for staying with us as we went through the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran, and the panelists.
Goodbye.
Before you leave, can I have a group picture of you together on the stage? And yes, thank you so much for the insights and especially bringing us through the real case problem that we are facing. And thank you for all of your initiatives from all parties toward driving this change. Thank you all of the audience for your engagement. We will resume shortly at 1:10 p.m. after the lunch break, and the afternoon session we will focus on strengthening the alignment of Asia's financial sector with climate commitments in the ballroom number 2. So the ballroom on the right side of your hand. And during their lunch break, we would like to invite everyone to join our marketplace, which is where we combine the Fair Finance Asia network and partner organization from different countries to showcase their work, share knowledge, and build collaborations. This will be open all day, so for those who join online, if you would like to come and visit us on site, we will be waiting for you. Yes, thank you all once again. Before you leave the room, please make sure you take all of your belongings with you. And if you would like to leave for today, please make sure you return the headset at the registration table. The next session will be on strengthening the alignment of Asia financial sector with climate commitments in the ballroom 2, which is the room on the right side of your hand.